Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission today is it's straightforward but really critical.
It
We are
is.
going deep into the world of antidepressant agents. We've got our pharmacological sources right here, and we are going to cut through all the density to, establish the chemical foundation of mood disorders.
Right. And then understand how the key drug classes actually work.
From the old school to the newest ones, and zero in on the absolute non-negotiable nursing safety protocols.
It's the ultimate shortcut to understanding how these medications fundamentally shift brain chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
And to start, let's just make sure we have the language right.
Okay.
When we talk about feelings, we often use the term affect.
Affect. Right.
That's just the emotional response you have to your environment, the normal spectrum of ups and downs. But then there's depression.
And that's different.
Very different. This is an affective disorder. It's characterized by sadness, despair, hopelessness that is severe, it's long-lasting, and often the patient can't even trace it back to a specific life stressor.
That distinction is so important. When the cause can't be pinpointed externally, well, that's why pharmacology becomes so vital, isn't it?
It forces us to look inside, exactly.
So if we strip away the symptoms for a minute and just look at the underlying theory, what is the chemical imbalance that guides pretty much all of this drug therapy?
Okay, that takes us right to the foundation. It's called the biogenic amine theory of depression.
Mm-hmm.
In the simplest terms, the theory is that depression results from a functional deficiency of certain key neurotransmitters, or biogenic amines, right there in the synapses of the brain.
And we're talking about
We're talking about norepinephrine, or AE, dopamine, DA, and especially serotonin, which is 5-HT.
a functional deficiency, so a shortage of the chemicals that make us feel good, motivated, balanced. So the big question is, why does that shortage even happen?
There are three main ways the system can fail, according to the sources. First, there's an enzyme called monoamine oxidase, or MAO.
MAO, got it.
And sometimes it just works too efficiently. It breaks down these amines faster than they can be used.
Okay, so it's overactive. What's the second way?
Second, if neurons are firing too rapidly, they can literally just deplete the neurotransmitter supply faster than the body can make more,
They just run out of juice.
pretty much. And the third reason is a little counterintuitive. Sometimes the postsynaptic receptors, the ones receiving the signal, they become too numerous or too sensitive.
So they're sucking up the amines too quickly.
Exactly. They essentially pull all the available amines out of the synaptic space before they can do their job.
I really appreciate that structure, because if the problem is a deficiency driven by those three things, breakdown, depletion, or hyperabsorption, then all the drugs must be designed to counteract that.
That's it. Every single class we're about to discuss is just a different approach to solving the same problem. They're all trying to raise the levels of NE, DA, or 5-HT.
How do they do it?
They either inhibit MAO, that enzyme, or they block the reuptake of the amines by the nerve that released them, or they regulate the receptor sites to encourage accumulation.
Okay, let's start with the first major drug class that was developed. The Tricyclic Antidepressants, or TCAs. I'm thinking of drugs like imipramine and amitriptyline. These were kind of the first generation, the original shotgun approach.
That's a really good analogy. Their mechanism is dual action.
Mm.
They are potent inhibitors of the presynaptic reuptake of both serotonin and norepinephrine.
So they block two at once.
Yes, and that blockage means those transmitters hang out in the synaptic cleft longer, which increases their concentration and hopefully relieves the depression.
And their utility is pretty broad. We see them used for general depression, and they're often picked if the patient's depression also comes with, like, heavy anxiety or sleep problems.
Because many TCAs are quite sedating.
Exactly. Plus, they have these niche uses, right? Like using clomipramine for OCD or even imipramine for childhood bedwetting.
They do, but here is the massive clinical caveat.
Oh.
TCAs are strongly anticholinergic.
And that explains a lot.
It explains their most common and most bothersome adverse effects. Think of that classic anticholinergic profile. Dry mouth, constipation, blurred vision, confusion.
And a really critical safety concern: urinary retention.
Yes. If you have an elderly male patient with prostate issues, this is a huge problem.
And the risk isn't just about discomfort. It can be life-threatening cardiovascular risk.
Absolutely. The CD risks with TCAs are high. They can cause orthostatic hypotension, which is a fall risk, dangerous arrhythmias, and they increase the risk of MI or stroke.
So you would never give this to someone who just had a heart attack.
Strictly contraindicated. And for a patient who is taking them successfully, They have to understand that stopping them abruptly causes a really severe withdrawal syndrome. We're talking nausea, headaches, nightmares. You just can't stop taking it.
So, given all that, especially the sedation and the anticholinergic effects, what is the single most important tip for administering TCAs?
It's practical pharmacology at its best. Give the major portion of the daily dose at bedtime.
Ah, so you use the side effect to your advantage.
You capitalize on the sedative effect to help the patient sleep, while the worst of the anticholinergic effects are minimized during their waking hours. And critically, you have to monitor these patients for 4 to 8 weeks before deciding the drug isn't working.
And this brings us to the universal rule for this whole chapter.
Yes, they carry that serious black box warning for increased suicidality, especially in children, adolescents, and young adults.
That warning applies across the board. Okay,
Right.
let's move to what is probably the most dangerous, most difficult class to manage, the monoamine oxidase inhibitors, MAOIs.
Like phenelzine, these are almost always reserved for depression that hasn't responded to anything else.
And that's because of one really critical adverse effect.
The risk of a hypertensive crisis, the mechanism is powerful. MAOIs irreversibly inhibit that MAO enzyme, which stops the breakdown of NEDA and 5-HT. They accumulate, they do their job, but MAO works everywhere, not just in the brain.
Right, and here's where we get that classic, really fascinating example of a drug-food interaction. Why does inhibiting this enzyme outside the brain turn into a blood pressure bomb?
Because MAO is usually the body's internal security guard against a substance called tyramine.
Tyramine.
Tyramine is a powerful presynaptic. It causes a release of norepinephrine, and it's found naturally in a lot of fermented, aged, or preserved foods.
So MAO is shut off.
If MAO is permanently shut off, that tyramine gets absorbed directly into the bloodstream in massive amounts. And that leads to this uncontrolled, dangerous surge of norepinephrine.
Which results in a potentially fatal hypertensive crisis. And the signs are, what, a really specific kind of headache?
The hallmark sign is a throbbing occipital headache right at the back of the head. Plus, neck stiffness, palpitations, chest pain. It can escalate to a stroke very quickly.
So this is why we have to basically visualize that tyramine food table from the textbook. Prescribing an MAOI means prescribing a huge life change.
It really does. We're talking about avoiding all aged cheeses, cheddar, Swiss, Parmesan,
All the good ones.
all of them. And all cured or smoked meats like salami and bologna, concentrated yeast extracts, Chianti and sherry wines, certain beers, and even limiting things like avocados and large amounts of chocolate.
Wow. So the nursing imperative here is way beyond just monitoring. It's really intensive patient education.
Oh, absolutely. You have to provide a clear, written list of
Right.
all those tyramine-containing foods, and you have to monitor blood pressure closely, especially for orthostatic changes.
And the safety net.
The ultimate safety net is this. If the patient complains of any severe headache, you immediately assume it's a crisis and discontinue the drug. You have to have phentolamine, which is an adrenergic blocker, available for emergency treatment to block all that excess NE.
That complexity and risk is precisely why the medical community was so desperate for the next generation of drugs.
It really was.
Let's shift gears dramatically now to the most commonly prescribed class today, the Selective Serotonin Reuptake Inhibitors, or SSRIs.
Think fluoxetine Prozac or sertraline Zoloft.
That's household names.
The shift to SSRIs in the late 80s and 90s was just revolutionary. They are the sniper drugs compared to the TCA shotgun.
Why is that?
Well, their mechanism is highly specific. They block the reuptake of 5-HT only, so they dramatically increase serotonin concentration, but they leave norepinephrine largely alone.
And that specificity.
It translated directly into fewer adverse effects than the clumsy broad TCAs or the dangerous MAOIs.
And that lower side effect profile is what turned fluoxetine into, a cultural phenomenon. Everyone was talking about Prozac, thinking it was some kind of quick personality fix.
It definitely changed the public conversation around mental health treatment, which was good, but we have to ground that enthusiasm in reality for our patients, meaning it is not a quick fix. It takes a good 4 to 6 weeks to achieve the full therapeutic effect. And counseling the patient about that waiting period is vital.
Okay, so beyond depression, the indications for SSRIs are pretty broad. We see them for OCD, panic attacks, bulimia, anxiety disorders. But even with their cleaner profile, they still carry two major synergy risks we have to talk about.
First and foremost is serotonin syndrome. This is a serious, even fatal reaction that can happen when you combine an SSRI with any other drug that also increases serotonin levels.
Like what?
Like MAOIs, SNRIs, certain migraine drugs called triptans, or even the herbal supplement St. John's wort. You essentially overdose the system on serotonin.
And the second risk is one that a lot of patients might not realize, an increased risk of bleeding.
Correct. Serotonin is actually really integral to platelet activity, so when SSRIs mess with serotonin, they also affect clotting.
So combining SSRIs with something like aspirin or an NSAI.
Or anticoagulants, it significantly heightens the risk of abnormal bleeding.
So for nursing care with SSRIs, we're circling back to two crucial points we've already made and adding one more. We have to limit the quantity dispensed to potentially suicidal patients. That black box warning is always there.
Always.
But we also have to counsel pregnant or potentially pregnant patients, right?
Yes, SSRIs are linked to some fetal abnormalities,
Yeah.
specifically pulmonary and cardiac issues in newborns. Barrier contraceptives are often recommended.
Okay. Our final major class kind of combines the specificity of the newer agents with the dual action of the older ones. The serotonin norepinephrine inhibitors, or SNRIs.
Like venlafaxine and duloxetine. These often bridge the gap if SSRIs aren't quite effective enough before you'd resort to a TCA.
So they're basically a modernized, cleaner version of the TCA mechanism. Is that fair to say?
That's a great way to put it. They decrease the neuronal reuptake of both 5-HT and NE, and sometimes weekly dopamine too. Their adverse effects are linked to that dual system.
Meaning you see some of that norepinephrine activity come back.
Exactly. Things like higher heart rates, hyperhidrosis, which is excessive sweating, tachycardia, and hypertension. And of course, they share that serotonin syndrome risk with the SSRIs.
Finally, we should give a quick nod to the other agents that don't really fit these four main classes. Bupropion, for example, sold as Wellbutrin or Zyban.
Right, which is famous because at lower doses, it's used very effectively for smoking cessation.
And then there are drugs like trazodone and nifazodone.
Whose use has become really limited because of severe side effects. Trazodone for priapism and severe CNS effects, and nifazodone for serious liver toxicity. But even these outliers, they all carry that universal black box warning.
What's so fascinating here is looking at the entire pharmacologic history of treating depression, from the broad, risky TCAs to the specific, safer SSRIs, and then these more targeted dual-action SNRIs.
It really is a journey of balancing efficacy and safety.
So if we're going to synthesize this for clinical practice, what are the key differentiators to remember?
Okay, so TCAs are dual action but come with heavy anticholinergic and cardiac risk. MAOIs are highly effective, but they're reserved because of that lethal risk of the tyramine-induced hypertensive crisis.
Right.
SSRIs are the first-line choice because of their specificity and manageable side effect profile, but you have to be vigilant about bleeding and serotonin syndrome. And SNRIs, well, they offer that dual 5-HT and NE punch with a better safety profile than the old TCAs.
But the single most critical safety concept that supersedes all of those class distinctions, the final takeaway, has to be that universal black box warning.
Yes, for any patient, but especially children, adolescents, or young adults starting these agents, the nursing responsibility is intense monitoring for emergent suicidality.
Oh, it's non-negotiable.
Non-negotiable. You have to limit the prescription quantity for those at risk of self-harm, you have to counsel thoroughly, and you have to ensure close follow-up. That vigilance is really the cornerstone of safe antidepressant administration.
A truly powerful deep dive into some very complex pharmacology. Thank you for walking us through these agents today.
My pleasure.
Continue to use these insights as you explore clinical application. We'll see you next time.